The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds as Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic and straightened his ceremonial hat. He had been a palace guard for 3 years now, and the routine never changed. Stand at attention, march in formation, and endure the endless jokes from his colleagues about his quiet nature and unassuming appearance. At 28, Marcus was shorter than most guards and carried himself with a humble demeanor that made others overlook him. His colleagues saw him as the guy who never spoke up during briefings, never joined them for drinks after work, and seemed more interested in reading books than talking about weapons or tactics. They had no idea that behind his calm exterior lay a mind that had been forged in the most dangerous corners of the world. "Thompson," barked Sergeant Williams, the head of palace security, "you're coming with us to the firing range today. Time to see if you can actually hit something besides ceremonial targets." The other guards snickered. Marcus had deliberately performed poorly during their monthly shooting assessments, missing targets that any decent marksman should hit with ease. He kept his scores just above the minimum requirement to avoid suspicion, while staying well below anything that might draw attention to his real abilities. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied quietly, falling in line with the group of 12 guards heading to the military training facility 20 minutes away from the palace grounds. As they walked, he listened to their conversation about weekend plans, football matches, and complaints about their supervisors. Guard Johnson, a burly man who never missed a chance to show off, slapped Marcus on the back. "Don't worry, Thompson. We all know you're better with a ceremonial sword than a real weapon. Maybe today you'll actually hit the target instead of embarrassing yourself." Marcus nodded politely, saying nothing. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best disguise was letting people underestimate you completely. In his previous life, that skill had kept him alive in places where being noticed meant being dead. The firing range was busy with various military units conducting their training. Marcus watched as soldiers from different regiments practiced with pistols, rifles, and even some specialized equipment he recognized from his former career. The familiar smell of gunpowder and the sound of bullets hitting targets brought back memories he had spent 3 years trying to forget. Sergeant Williams gathered the palace guards around a table covered with standard-issue pistols. "All right, gentlemen. Today we're testing your skills with live ammunition. Each of you will fire 30 rounds at targets ranging from 25 to 100 meters. Your scores will be recorded and filed with headquarters." Marcus picked up his assigned weapon, a Glock 19, and examined it briefly. The weight felt familiar in his hands, though he was careful not to handle it with the practiced efficiency that would give away his experience. Instead, he fumbled slightly with the safety mechanism, playing the part of someone who was competent enough to be a palace guard, but nothing more. The first group of guards stepped up to the firing line. Marcus watched as they took their positions, some showing decent form while others struggled with basic stance and grip. Johnson was in this group, and he made sure everyone knew he had been top of his class in basic training 5 years ago. "Watch and learn, boys," Johnson called out, raising his pistol toward the 25-meter target. His first shot hit the outer ring of the target, and he grinned with satisfaction. The remaining shots were scattered across the target, with a few completely missing the mark. When Johnson's turn was finished, he had scored 63 points out of a possible 150. It was a respectable score for Palace Guard standards, and Johnson made sure everyone knew it. "Not bad for someone who hasn't had proper range time in months," he boasted. The other guards in the first group performed similarly, with scores ranging from 48 to 71 points. Sergeant Williams nodded approvingly at the results, making notes on his clipboard. "Decent shooting, men. Remember, accuracy is more important than speed in our line of work." Marcus was assigned to the second group, along with 5 other guards, including Stevens, a young recruit who had joined the Palace Guard only 6 months ago. Stevens was nervous, constantly adjusting his grip and asking questions about proper breathing techniques. "Thompson, you're up first," announced the range instructor, a retired Army sergeant named Davidson, who had been running these training sessions for over a decade. "Take your time, focus on your fundamentals, and remember what you learned in basic training." Marcus stepped up to the firing line and took his position. He deliberately adopted a slightly awkward stance, the kind that would produce mediocre results. Around him, the other guards watched with casual interest, expecting another underwhelming performance from their quiet colleague. The 25-meter target looked enormous from Marcus's perspective. In his former life, He had regularly engaged targets at distances that would seem impossible to these men. He had fired shots in conditions these guards couldn't imagine, under pressure that would break most people. But today he was just Thompson, the unremarkable palace guard who read too many books and kept to himself. He raised his pistol, took aim, and fired his first shot. It hit the target just inside the outer ring, exactly where he intended it to go. Not good enough to impress anyone, but not bad enough to raise concerns about his fitness for duty. The second shot followed the same pattern, then the third. Marcus carefully controlled each shot, maintaining the image of someone who was trying their best but simply lacked natural talent or extensive training. It was a performance that required far more skill than actually hitting the bullseye would have demanded. As he continued firing, Marcus noticed Davidson watching him with slightly more attention than usual. The instructor had seen thousands of shooters over the years, and something about Marcus's shooting pattern seemed to catch his eye. Marcus made a mental note to be even more careful with his remaining shots. The final score was 55 points, placing Marcus squarely in the middle of the group's performance. Johnson patted him on the shoulder condescendingly. "Well done, Thompson. You're improving. Maybe next time you'll break 60. Marcus smiled politely and thanked him for the encouragement, all while knowing that his deliberately poor performance had actually required more precision and control than any of his colleagues possessed. As they prepared to leave the range, he had no idea that his carefully maintained cover was about to be tested in ways he never expected. 3 weeks after the firing range incident, Marcus was settling into his usual routine when everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning, and he was stationed at the east entrance of the palace when Sergeant Williams approached him with an unusual expression on his face. "Thompson, you're needed in the commander's office immediately," Williams said, his voice carrying a tone Marcus hadn't heard before. "Leave your post to Harrison and follow me." Marcus felt a familiar tension in his chest as he walked through the palace corridors. In his previous life, unexpected summons usually meant either a new mission or that his cover had been blown. He kept his expression neutral while his mind raced through possibilities. Commander Peterson's office was located in the administrative wing of the palace complex. Marcus had only been there twice before, both times for routine paperwork signings. The commander was a career military officer who had transitioned to palace security after serving 25 years in various combat zones. "Sit down, Thompson," Peterson said without looking up from a file on his desk. When he finally raised his eyes, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. "Recognition. Tell me about your service record before joining the Palace Guard," Peterson said, leaning back in his chair. "And this time I want the real version, not the sanitized report in your personnel file." Marcus maintained his composed exterior while calculating his options. His cover identity as a former Army logistics specialist had been carefully crafted and should have been bulletproof. "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean. My service record is accurately documented in my file." Peterson opened a thick folder and spread several photographs across his desk. Marcus recognized them immediately. They were surveillance photos from various locations around the world, taken during operations he had conducted years ago. In some, he was barely recognizable due to disguises and different equipment, but his face was clear enough for someone who knew what to look for. Sergeant Marcus Thompson, SAS Regiment, classified operations in Afghanistan, Syria, and several locations that officially don't exist, Peterson read from the file. Confirmed kills, classified but estimated at over 40. Specialization: long-range precision shooting and covert elimination, decorated multiple times for operations that will never appear in any public record. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on Peterson's desk. Marcus realized that denying the truth was no longer an option, but he needed to understand how much Peterson actually knew and what he wanted. "How long have you known?" Marcus asked quietly, dropping the humble Palace Guard act for the first time in 3 years. "I suspected something was off about you from the beginning," Peterson replied. "Your application was too perfect, your references too clean, and your behavior too controlled for someone with your supposed background. But it wasn't until last week that I received confirmation from an old friend at GCHQ." Peterson pulled out another document, this one bearing official government seals. "It seems that Marcus Thompson is supposed to be dead, killed in action during a classified operation in Eastern Europe 3 years ago, officially at least." Marcus had known this day might come eventually. When he left the SAS and took on his new identity, the agreement was that his death would be faked and his real identity buried so deep that even most government agencies wouldn't be able to find it. The fact that Peterson had somehow obtained this information meant someone very high up the chain had authorized it. "What do you want?" Marcus asked directly. "Right now I want answers," Peterson said. "Why is one of Britain's most lethal operatives working as a palace guard? Who authorized your placement here? And most importantly, are you a threat to the people I'm sworn to protect?" Marcus considered his response carefully. The truth was complicated and involved psychological trauma, political decisions above his pay grade, and a desperate need to disappear from a life that had nearly destroyed him. But he couldn't share most of that without authorization. "I requested reassignment to a non-operational role for personal reasons," he said finally. "My placement here was approved through proper channels, though those channels are above your clearance level. I pose no threat to anyone in this facility." Peterson studied him for several minutes. "The psychological evaluation in your real file makes for interesting reading. Post-traumatic stress, survivor's guilt, and what the doctors described as moral injury from years of operations that pushed ethical boundaries." Marcus said nothing, but Peterson's words hit closer to home than he cared to admit. The nightmares had finally stopped 6 months ago, but the weight of what he had done in service to his country would never fully leave him. "I have a problem, Thompson, and I think you might be the solution," Peterson continued. "In 2 days, we're hosting a state visit from the Prime Minister of a country that shall remain nameless. Intelligence suggests there may be a credible threat against both him and our own officials." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of threat?" "The kind that requires someone with very specific skills to neutralize," Peterson said, sliding another file across the desk. "We've identified a potential sniper's nest in a building 600 meters from the main reception hall. Local police and our regular security can't cover that angle effectively without causing a diplomatic incident." Marcus opened the file and studied the photographs and tactical assessment. His trained eye immediately identified 3 possible shooting positions in the target building, along with several escape routes an assassin might use. The complexity of the situation was exactly the kind of challenge that had once excited him, before he learned to fear what that excitement meant about who he was becoming. "You want me to provide counter-sniper support?" he said. "I want you to do what you do best," Peterson replied. "Keep people alive by making sure the bad guys don't." Marcus closed the file and looked directly at Peterson. "And if I refuse? Then I'll have to find another solution, one that might not be as clean or effective. People could die, Thompson, innocent people, including some who are probably sitting in this building right now." The weight of the decision pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. He had spent 3 years trying to build a life where his skills weren't needed, where he could contribute to society without taking lives. But Peterson was right about one thing. If there really was a threat and if innocent people were at risk, his refusal to act could result in deaths he might have prevented. "I'll need to see the full intelligence briefing," Marcus said finally. Peterson smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "I was hoping you'd say that. The briefing is scheduled for 1800 hours. And Thompson, you might want to start thinking of yourself as more than just a palace guard again." As Marcus left the commander's office, he realized that his carefully constructed new life was about to collide with the deadly skills he had tried so hard to leave behind. The quiet palace guard was about to remember what it meant to be a weapon. The intelligence briefing room was located 3 floors below the main palace structure, in a section that most guards didn't even know existed. Marcus descended the narrow staircase, each step taking him further away from the simple life he had built and closer to the world he had tried to escape. The briefing room contained 6 people when Marcus arrived. Besides Commander Peterson, there was a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Agent Collins from the Security Service, 2 men from the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Command, and surprisingly Colonel Hayes from SAS headquarters. "Hello, Marcus," Hayes said with a slight smile. "It's been a long time." Marcus nodded respectfully to his former commanding officer. Hayes was one of the few people who knew the complete truth about why Marcus had left the regiment. Their last conversation, 3 years ago, had ended with Hayes telling him that the door would always be open if he ever wanted to come back. "Gentlemen, let's begin," Agent Collins said, activating a large display screen. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels. The Prime Minister of Kazakhstan is arriving tomorrow for crucial trade negotiations. Intelligence from multiple sources suggests an assassination attempt is being planned. The screen displayed surveillance photos of 3 men, all appearing to be of Middle Eastern descent. Marcus studied their faces, noting the disciplined way they carried themselves and the alertness in their eyes that suggested military training. These men entered the country 5 days ago using forged passports. Collins continued. We believe they are operatives from a terrorist organization that opposes Kazakhstan's new government. Their leader, shown here, is Khalil Nazari, a former sniper with the Iraqi Republican Guard who has been linked to at least 12 assassinations across Europe. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He recognized Nazari's name from intelligence briefings he had received years ago. The man was considered one of the most dangerous long-range killers in the terrorist network, with skills that rivaled many military snipers. We've tracked them to this building, Collins said, switching to aerial photographs of a modern office complex 600 meters from the palace. The building has been evacuated for electrical maintenance, but we believe Nazari's team has established a sniper's nest on the 12th floor. The tactical assessment was thorough and professional. Marcus could see that significant resources had been devoted to identifying the threat and developing response options. But as he studied the photographs and building schematics, he also saw the challenges that conventional security forces would face. The problem, explained Inspector Bradley from Counter-Terrorism Command, is that we cannot assault the building without creating exactly the kind of international incident that would destroy the diplomatic mission. Kazakhstan's enemies would achieve their goal even if we prevented the assassination. Additionally, Peterson added, any obvious security presence around that building would alert other potential threats and might cause the assassins to simply postpone their attempt until we're less prepared. Colonel Hayes leaned forward in his chair. Which brings us to why you're here, Marcus. We need someone who can neutralize the threat without anyone knowing it happened until after the state visit is concluded. Marcus studied the building schematics more carefully. The office complex was a modern structure with excellent sightlines to the palace, but it also had several architectural features that could work in his favor. More importantly, there was a building of similar height about 400 meters away that would provide an ideal position for counter-sniper operations. What's the timeline? Marcus asked. The state dinner begins at 1900 hours tomorrow, Collins replied. Intelligence suggests the assassination attempt will occur during the outdoor portion of the ceremony, when both leaders will be visible from the target building. That gives us approximately 22 hours to plan and execute, Hayes noted. Not much time, but I've seen you work with less. Marcus continued studying the materials while his mind automatically began developing operational scenarios. It was like riding a bicycle. Despite 3 years away from this kind of work, his tactical thinking remained sharp and instinctive. I'll need specialized equipment, he said finally. Something with more range and precision than standard police weapons. Hayes smiled. Already arranged. We have an Accuracy International L115A3 standing by, along with match-grade ammunition and full support equipment. It's the same system you used in Syria. The mention of Syria brought back memories Marcus had spent considerable effort suppressing. That mission had been successful from a tactical standpoint, but the psychological cost had been enormous. He pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the current situation. What about insertion and extraction? Marcus asked. The building across from the target has a construction company doing renovation work, Peterson explained. We've arranged for you to be added to their crew roster. You'll have legitimate access to the roof and time to establish your position. Agent Collins activated another screen showing detailed weather forecasts and environmental conditions. Wind will be minimal tomorrow evening with clear skies. Temperature will be approximately 18 degrees Celsius. Ideal conditions for precision shooting. Marcus absorbed all the technical details while part of his mind remained focused on the moral dimensions of what he was being asked to do. 3 years ago, he would have accepted this mission without hesitation. Now he found himself considering questions that had never occurred to him during his active service. I need to know something, he said, looking directly at Collins. Are we absolutely certain these men are planning an assassination? Is there any possibility this intelligence is incorrect? Collins and Hayes exchanged glances before Collins answered. The intelligence comes from multiple independent sources, including electronic intercepts and human assets. We are as certain as we can be without actually witnessing the attempt. And if I take the shot and we're wrong? Marcus pressed. Then you'll have killed 3 innocent men, Hayes said bluntly. But if we're right and you don't take the shot, a lot more innocent people could die, including some very important ones. The room fell silent as Marcus weighed the decision. He had killed before many times, but always under orders and always with the certainty that his targets were legitimate threats. This situation was different. He would be acting on intelligence assessments and probabilities, not direct observation of hostile action. I need 1 hour to think about this, Marcus said finally. You have 30 minutes, Collins replied. After that, we need to begin positioning equipment and establishing communications. Marcus stood and walked toward the door, knowing that in 30 minutes he would have to choose between the peaceful life he had built and the deadly skills that defined his past. Outside in the corridor, he could hear the distant sounds of normal palace operations. Guards changing shifts, tourists being guided through public areas, staff preparing for tomorrow's diplomatic events. In 30 minutes, he would decide whether Marcus Thompson, the palace guard, would disappear forever, replaced once again by the weapon he had tried so hard to stop being. Marcus found himself in the palace gardens, walking along a path he had patrolled hundreds of times as a guard but never really seen. The late afternoon sun filtered through ancient oak trees, casting patterns of light and shadow that reminded him of camouflage patterns he had memorized years ago. Even here, in this peaceful setting, his mind couldn't completely escape the tactical thinking that had been drilled into him. He sat on a stone bench facing the main palace building, the same building he would be protecting tomorrow if he accepted the mission. Through the windows, he could see staff members preparing for the state visit, arranging flowers, polishing silver, and setting up security checkpoints. Normal people doing normal work, unaware that their safety might depend on a decision he was about to make. His phone buzzed with a text message from his sister Sarah, who lived in Scotland with her husband and 2 young children. Hope you're doing well, little brother. The kids keep asking when Uncle Marcus is coming to visit again. The message included a photo of his nephew and niece building a sandcastle at the beach, their faces bright with innocent joy. Marcus stared at the photo for several minutes. Sarah was the only family member who knew he was alive, though she believed he worked in palace security because he wanted a quiet job after his army service. She had no idea what he had really done during those missing years, or why he sometimes woke up screaming from nightmares he couldn't share with anyone. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had left the SAS because taking lives, even enemy lives, had begun eating away at his soul. The psychological evaluation Hayes had mentioned was accurate. He had been diagnosed with moral injury, a condition that occurred when someone was forced to act against their fundamental beliefs about right and wrong, even in service of a greater good. But now he was being asked to take lives again, possibly to save lives. The utilitarian calculus was simple. 3 potential assassins versus dozens of innocent victims, including world leaders whose deaths could destabilize entire regions. From a purely logical standpoint, the choice was obvious. Marcus thought about Khalil Nazari and the intelligence file on the 3 suspected terrorists. If the assessment was correct, these men had already killed innocent people and were planning to kill more. They had made their choice to use violence to achieve political goals. His choice would be whether to stop them. He pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in over a year. He called Dr. Amanda Richardson, the military psychologist who had worked with him during his transition out of active service. She had told him to contact her if he ever faced a situation that brought back his old life. Marcus. Dr. Richardson's voice carried surprise and concern. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. How are you doing? I'm facing a decision, Marcus said carefully, aware that their conversation might not be completely private. Something that involves using skills from my previous work to potentially prevent harm to innocent people. There was a pause before Dr. Richardson responded. Are you being asked to return to operational duty? Something like that. For 1 mission only. Marcus, when we last spoke, you were making excellent progress in building a new identity for yourself. You had found peace in your new role. Are you prepared to risk that psychological stability? The question cut to the heart of his dilemma. The 3 years as a palace guard had been the most psychologically healthy of his adult life. He slept through most nights without nightmares. He had learned to find satisfaction in simple tasks and normal human interactions. He had begun to believe that he might eventually be able to have relationships and maybe even a family of his own. "What if innocent people die because I refuse to act?" Marcus asked. "And what if you act and discover that your intelligence was wrong? What if you kill innocent people? How would that affect the progress you've made?" Dr. Richardson's questions forced Marcus to confront possibilities he had been avoiding. The intelligence seemed solid, but intelligence was sometimes wrong. During his active career, he had seen operations based on faulty information that resulted in civilian casualties and political disasters. "There's something else," Dr. Richardson continued. "During our sessions, we identified that part of your psychological trauma came from feeling that you had no choice in your actions. You were following orders, serving your country, doing what others decided was necessary. This situation sounds different. This time the choice is yours." Marcus realized she was right. For the first time in his career, he was being asked to volunteer for a mission rather than being ordered to carry it out. That autonomy changed the psychological dynamic significantly. If he acted, it would be because he had decided it was the right thing to do, not because someone else had made that decision for him. "I need to ask you something," he said. "In your professional opinion, am I psychologically capable of returning to operational duty without suffering permanent damage to my mental health?" Dr. Richardson was quiet for nearly a minute before answering. "Marcus, you've done remarkable work in healing from your trauma. You've developed coping mechanisms and found meaning in peaceful service, but you're not the same person who left the SAS 3 years ago. You've gained perspective and emotional intelligence that you didn't have during your active career. Is that a yes or no? It's a statement that you're now equipped to make decisions based on your complete humanity, not just your training and sense of duty. If you decide to accept this mission, you'll be doing so as a whole person who understands the full cost of violence, not as a weapon that simply follows targeting instructions." Marcus ended the call and sat in silence for several more minutes. Around him, the palace grounds continued their normal activity. Security guards walked their routes, gardeners tended to flower beds, and tourists gathered near the main gates for the evening changing of the guard ceremony. His watch showed that he had 5 minutes left before he needed to return to the briefing room. 5 minutes to decide whether to remain Marcus Thompson, the palace guard, or become once again the precision instrument of state violence he had trained to be. He thought about the photograph on his phone, his nephew and niece building their sandcastle, living in a world where they could play on beaches without worrying about snipers or terrorists or the complex moral calculations that kept their world safe. Someone had to make the hard decisions that preserved that innocence. Marcus stood up from the bench and walked back toward the palace. By the time he reached the entrance to the underground briefing room, his decision was made. He would accept the mission, but this time he would do so with full awareness of what it meant and what it might cost him. As he descended the stairs, he realized that he wasn't becoming the old Marcus Thompson. He was becoming someone new, a man who could use deadly skills when necessary, but who would never again lose sight of why those skills sometimes needed to be used. The pre-dawn hours were Marcus's favorite time at the palace. At 4:30 in the morning, the grounds were quiet except for essential security personnel and the occasional maintenance worker. Today, however, his early arrival served a different purpose than his usual preference for solitude. Marcus made his way to a service entrance that led to the palace's underground storage areas. Colonel Hayes was waiting for him with a large equipment case and civilian work clothes. The transformation from palace guard to construction worker took only minutes, but the psychological shift was more complex. "The rifle is exactly as you specified," Hayes said, opening the case to reveal the Accuracy International L115A3 sniper system. "Match-grade ammunition, suppressor, and the Schmidt and Bender scope you preferred during active service. We've also included backup systems and emergency communications equipment." Marcus ran his hands over the weapon with the familiarity of someone greeting an old friend. The rifle felt perfectly balanced, its weight and dimensions exactly matching his muscle memory. He checked the scope adjustments and bolt action, noting that everything had been precisely calibrated for his shooting preferences. "Intelligence update?" Marcus asked while examining the ammunition. "Thermal imaging confirmed 3 individuals in the target building as of 2 hours ago," Hayes replied. "They've established positions on the 12th floor exactly as predicted. No change in the assessment of threat level?" Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar pre-mission focus beginning to narrow his attention to essential details. Weather conditions? Unchanged. Light winds from the southwest, clear skies, temperature rising to 20 degrees by evening. Excellent shooting conditions. The construction van was waiting in the palace service area, complete with realistic company markings and all the proper documentation for accessing the building where Marcus would establish his position. As they loaded the equipment, Hayes handed him an earpiece and communication device disguised as a standard construction radio. Command frequency is encrypted and will be monitored by Agent Collins and myself, Hayes explained. You'll also have direct communication with the palace security detail and emergency response teams. Marcus clipped the radio to his belt and tested the earpiece. The familiar weight of operational equipment felt strange after 3 years of carrying nothing more threatening than ceremonial weapons and a basic communication device. The drive to the target building took 12 minutes. Through early morning London traffic, Marcus used the time to review the building schematics one final time and visualize his approach to the roof position. The muscle memory of mission preparation was returning, but his mental state remained calmer and more analytical than it had been during his active career. The construction site supervisor, who was clearly military despite his civilian clothes, greeted them at the building entrance. "Morning, gentlemen. You're here for the roofing inspection, correct? Everything's arranged as requested." Marcus followed the supervisor to a service elevator that carried them directly to the building's roof access. The morning air was crisp and clean, with visibility extending well beyond the operational requirements. From this position, he had clear sightlines to both the target building and the palace grounds. "I'll leave you to your work," the supervisor said. "The roof access will remain clear until 1800 hours, and the building is officially empty except for essential maintenance staff who have been briefed to avoid this area." Alone on the rooftop, Marcus began the methodical process of establishing his sniper position. He selected a location that provided optimal angles while remaining concealed from observation. The rifle system was assembled and calibrated within 30 minutes, with backup equipment positioned for rapid deployment if needed. Through the rifle scope, Marcus could clearly see the windows of the target building 600 meters away. At this distance, with these conditions, hitting a human-sized target would require good technique but was well within his capabilities. He could even see subtle movements behind the windows that confirmed the presence of the suspected assassins. "Overwatch position established," Marcus reported through his radio. "Visual confirmation of movement in target building. No immediate threat observed at this time." "Acknowledged, Overwatch," came Agent Collins's voice through his earpiece. "State visit preparations proceeding on schedule. Maintain position and report any changes in threat assessment." Marcus settled into the patient waiting that characterized much of sniper operations. He had spent countless hours in similar positions during his active career, watching and waiting for targets that might never appear, or threats that might never materialize. The difference today was his awareness of the moral weight of what he might be called upon to do. Through his scope, he began observing the individuals in the target building more closely. 2 figures moved with the systematic efficiency of people conducting surveillance, while a third appeared to be assembling something that could be weapons or technical equipment. Their behavior matched the patterns he would expect from a professional assassination team. At noon, Marcus observed significant activity in the target building. One figure took position at a window with what appeared to be a long-range rifle, while the other 2 arranged equipment and communications gear. The setup suggested they were preparing for an operation scheduled for later in the day. "Command, this is Overwatch," Marcus reported. "Target building shows increased activity consistent with pre-operational preparations. Recommend heightened alert status." "Acknowledged, Overwatch. Palace security has been notified. Maintain observation and prepare for possible engagement authorization." The afternoon passed slowly as Marcus maintained his vigil. Through his scope, he watched the suspected assassins complete their preparations and settle into what appeared to be a waiting pattern similar to his own. The irony wasn't lost on him that both sides were now prepared for an encounter that might never occur. At 1700 hours, Marcus received an update that made his pulse quicken. "Overwatch, the state visit is proceeding as planned. Prime Minister's convoy will arrive at 1745, with outdoor ceremonies beginning at 1900 hours. You are authorized to engage hostile targets if they present an immediate threat to protected persons." Marcus acknowledged the authorization while feeling the familiar pre-combat adrenaline beginning to flow through his system. After 3 years of peaceful routine, his body was remembering the biochemical reality of life or death situations. Through his scope, he could see increased activity in the target building. The figure with the rifle had taken position at the window and appeared to be conducting range estimation and wind calculations. The professional nature of their preparations confirmed that these were not amateur terrorists but skilled operatives. At 17:43, Marcus observed the lead figure raise his rifle and begin tracking movement in the direction of the palace. Through his own scope, Marcus could see the Prime Minister's convoy approaching the palace gates. "Command, target building shows hostile intent," Marcus reported, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "Primary target has weapon trained on approach route. Request final authorization for engagement. Overwatch, you are cleared to engage. Repeat, you are cleared to engage hostile targets." Marcus centered his crosshairs on the figure at the window and began his breathing cycle. 600 meters, slight wind from the southwest, target moving slowly from left to right. The calculations were automatic, based on thousands of hours of training and real-world experience. But as his finger moved to the trigger, Marcus realized that this moment was different from every shot he had fired during his active career. This time he was choosing to kill not because he had been ordered to do so, but because he had decided it was necessary to protect innocent lives. The decision gave him clarity rather than doubt. Marcus exhaled slowly, steadied his aim, and prepared to engage. The first shot broke the evening silence with a suppressed crack that sounded like a distant hand clap. Through his scope, Marcus watched the primary target collapse backward from the window, the threat rifle spinning away across the floor. The shot had been perfect, striking the assassin's center mass just as he was preparing to fire at the approaching convoy. "Target 1 down," Marcus reported calmly into his radio, already shifting his aim to the second figure, who was reaching for what appeared to be a backup weapon. The second shot followed 3 seconds later. The remaining assassins were now aware they were under attack, but their position in the building made them vulnerable to Marcus's elevated shooting position, while giving them no clear way to locate or return fire against him. "Target 2 down," Marcus reported, third target taking cover behind interior walls. No clear shot at this time. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear increased radio chatter from palace security teams and police units. The Prime Minister's convoy had been halted short of the palace gates as emergency protocols were activated. In the distance, he could see armed response, vehicles moving toward the target building. The third assassin remained out of sight for several minutes before appearing at a different window carrying what looked like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Marcus realized with cold precision that this was not just an assassination attempt but a coordinated attack designed to cause maximum damage even if the primary mission failed. "Command, third target has RPG system," Marcus reported. "Appears to be targeting palace grounds or response vehicles. Overwatch, you are cleared to engage immediately," came the urgent response. Marcus adjusted his position slightly to get a better angle on the new window. The third assassin was partially concealed but had to expose himself to aim the RPG effectively. Marcus waited with the patience that had made him one of the most effective snipers in the SAS, watching for the moment when his target would present a clear shot. The opportunity came when the assassin moved to the window edge to acquire his target. Marcus's third shot struck the man in the upper chest, spinning him around and sending the RPG launcher clattering to the floor unused. The threat was neutralized, but Marcus maintained his position in case there were additional hostiles he hadn't observed. "All targets down," Marcus reported. "Building appears secure, but recommend full clearance by assault teams before declaring area safe. Acknowledged, Overwatch." "Excellent work. Maintain position until building is cleared and area is declared secure," Marcus continued his surveillance of the target building while armed. Police units surrounded it and began their methodical, room-by-room clearance. Through his scope, he could see officers moving through the floors below the assassin's position, working their way upward with tactical precision. The clearing operation took 40 minutes. During that time, Marcus observed the palace grounds as normal security protocols resumed and the state visit preparations continued. The Prime Minister's convoy had been moved to a secure holding area, but the evening's diplomatic events would proceed as planned once the all-clear was given. "Overwatch, building is clear," came the report from the assault team leader. 3 hostile KIA, no additional threats identified. Extensive weapons cache and communications equipment recovered. Your assessment was accurate. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and familiar emptiness as he began disassembling his rifle system. The mission was complete, the threat neutralized and innocent lives protected. But taking 3 lives, even enemy lives, brought back psychological shadows he had worked hard to overcome. Overwatch, you are cleared to extract. Agent Collins' voice came through his earpiece. Transport is en route to your position. As Marcus packed his equipment, he forced himself to think about what had just occurred. 3 men were dead because of actions he had taken. But those same 3 men had been preparing to kill dozens of innocent people, including world leaders whose deaths could have triggered international crises. The extraction vehicle arrived as planned, with Colonel Hayes in the passenger seat. As they drove back toward the palace, Hayes handed Marcus a secure phone with an incoming call indicator. "It's the Prime Minister," Hayes said simply. Marcus accepted the phone with surprise. In his entire career, he had never received direct communication from political leadership during or immediately after operations. "This is Thompson," he said. "Sergeant Thompson, this is Prime Minister Morrison," came the familiar voice he had heard countless times on television. "I understand I owe you my life, and possibly the lives of many others." "I was doing my job, sir," Marcus replied, uncertain how to respond to such direct acknowledgement. "Your job ended 3 years ago when you left active service," the Prime Minister said. "What you did today was choose to serve your country again when it needed you most. That choice may have prevented an international incident that could have destabilized relations with multiple allies." Marcus listened as the Prime Minister continued. "I'm told you've been working as a palace guard, keeping your exceptional skills private. I want you to know that your service, both past and present, is recognized and appreciated at the highest levels." After ending the call, Marcus sat in silence as they approached the palace. The adrenaline was fading. Replaced by the complex emotions he remembered from previous operations, there was satisfaction in mission success, relief that innocent lives had been saved, but also the weight of having killed again after 3 years of peace. "How are you holding up?" Hayes asked as they pulled into the palace service area. "Better than I expected," Marcus answered honestly. "Different than before, but better." "That's because you're different than before," Hayes observed. "You made this choice with full understanding of what it meant, not just as a soldier following orders. That makes all the difference psychologically." Back in the underground briefing room, Marcus underwent a detailed mission debrief with Agent Collins, Inspector Bradley, and Commander Peterson. The intelligence assessment had been completely accurate. The 3 assassins were confirmed members of a terrorist cell with connections to multiple previous attacks. Recovery of their communications equipment revealed plans for a coordinated assault that would have killed dozens of people. "The question now," Peterson said as the formal debrief concluded, "is what happens next. Your cover as a simple palace guard is obviously compromised within security circles." Marcus had been thinking about this problem during the extraction. His quiet life as an anonymous security guard was over, but he wasn't sure he wanted to return to full operational duty either. "I'd like to continue working palace security," he said finally, "but perhaps in a role that makes better use of my actual qualifications." Agent Collins smiled. "I think we can arrange something that keeps you close to the palace while giving you responsibilities more suited to your abilities. There are always threats that require someone with your specific expertise." As the meeting ended and the participants began to disperse, Marcus realized that his life had changed again. He was no longer the broken soldier who had fled from his past, nor was he the simple palace guard who had tried to pretend that past didn't exist. He was something new. A man who could use deadly skills when necessary while maintaining his humanity and moral clarity. Walking back through the palace corridors toward his quarters, Marcus felt a sense of resolution he hadn't experienced in years. He had faced his past, used his skills to protect innocent lives, and discovered that he could do so without losing himself in the process. Tomorrow, he would begin building yet another new life, one that honored both the man he had been and the man he was becoming. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same firing range where his colleagues had once mocked his deliberately poor shooting. This time, however, he wore the insignia of a special security advisor, and the men around him were elite protection officers who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. "Today we're working on long-range precision scenarios," Marcus announced to the group of 12 officers. "The threat assessment has evolved, and we need to be prepared for situations that require engagement beyond standard pistol range." The transformation in how his colleagues treated him had been remarkable. Johnson, who had once condescended to him about his shooting, now listened intently to Marcus's instruction and asked respectful questions about advanced techniques. The same men who had viewed him as the quiet, unremarkable palace guard now sought his advice on everything from threat assessment to tactical positioning. Thompson, called Sergeant Williams, who had been promoted to Deputy Commander of Palace Security, "The new recruits are requesting additional training sessions with you. Word has gotten around about your methods." Marcus nodded, feeling satisfied in a way that was completely different from the satisfaction he had once found in successful eliminations. Teaching others how to protect innocent lives felt like a natural evolution of his skills, a way to multiply his effectiveness without personally having to take more lives. His new role as Special Security Advisor had been carefully crafted to utilize his expertise while giving him the autonomy he needed. He reported directly to Commander Peterson but had broad authority to assess threats, train personnel, and recommend security improvements. Most importantly, he only participated in operations when his specific skills were absolutely necessary. The psychological impact of returning to active duty, even in this limited capacity, had been managed through regular sessions with Dr. Richardson and a carefully structured support system. Marcus had learned to compartmentalize his operational activities while maintaining his emotional well-being and sense of moral clarity. "Sir," approached Officer Stevens, the young recruit who had been nervous during that first firing range session months ago, "I wanted to thank you for the additional training. My qualification scores have improved by 40% since working with you." "Good shooting is just one part of protection work," Marcus replied. "The most important skill is learning to see threats before they become emergencies. Keep working on your observation and assessment abilities." Stevens nodded eagerly and returned to his practice. Marcus watched the young man with satisfaction, remembering his own early training and the mentors who had shaped his development. There was something deeply fulfilling about passing on knowledge that would help others serve effectively while staying alive. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Agent Collins. "Potential situation developing. Your assessment requested at earliest convenience." Marcus read the message twice before deleting it, already shifting into the analytical mindset that such communications required. "Williams, take over the training session," Marcus instructed. "Continue with the 100-meter scenarios and make sure everyone demonstrates proper breathing technique." The underground briefing room felt familiar now, though Marcus approached it with different emotions than he had 6 months ago. Agent Collins was waiting with Commander Peterson, and a man Marcus didn't recognize wearing civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide his military bearing. "Marcus, meet David Cameron from the Diplomatic Protection Group," Collins said. "We have a situation that may require your particular expertise." Cameron nodded respectfully before activating a display screen. 3 days from now, we're hosting a G7 summit security meeting here at the Palace. Intelligence suggests a new threat from the same network we dealt with 6 months ago." Marcus studied the surveillance photos and intelligence assessments with the professional detachment he had developed. The threat appeared sophisticated and well-planned, but not beyond the capabilities of conventional security forces working with proper intelligence support. "What makes this situation different from standard diplomatic protection protocols?" Marcus asked. "The potential for multiple simultaneous threats," Cameron replied. "We're looking at possible attacks from 3 different directions, including one that would require extreme-range interdiction capabilities." Marcus reviewed the tactical analysis and building schematics. The threat assessment was thorough, and the proposed response plans were professionally developed. His role would be to provide overwatch and precision engagement capabilities that complemented rather than replaced the primary security plan. "This is different from the previous situation," he observed. "You're not asking me to operate alone or make independent targeting decisions. This would be integrated support within a larger security framework." "Exactly," Peterson confirmed. "Your unique capabilities are needed, but as part of a team effort rather than a solo operation." Marcus considered the proposal carefully. The psychological framework was much healthier than his previous operational experience. He would be supporting a mission rather than executing it, working with colleagues rather than operating in isolation, and serving under clear command authority rather than making independent life or death decisions. I'll need to review the complete operational plan and participate in all planning sessions, Marcus said finally. If I'm going to be responsible for one element of this operation, I need to understand how it integrates with everything else. Absolutely, Collins agreed. This is a collaborative effort from the beginning. Over the following 3 days, Marcus participated in the most thorough operational planning process he had ever experienced. Every aspect of the security plan was discussed, analyzed, and refined by teams of experts representing different specialties and agencies. His input was sought and valued, but he was never asked to make decisions beyond his specific area of expertise. The day of the summit, Marcus took position in a carefully prepared location that provided coverage for the areas conventional security couldn't adequately monitor. His equipment was state-of-the-art, his communications were seamless, and his backup support was professional and reliable. The operation proceeded flawlessly. 2 minor threats were detected and neutralized by conventional security teams before they could develop into serious situations. Marcus's position provided valuable intelligence and overwatch capability, but no shots were fired and no lives were taken. Stand down. All stations, came the final radio call as the summit concluded and visiting dignitaries departed safely. Operation complete, all threats contained. As Marcus packed his equipment for the final time, he reflected on how much his life had changed. He was still using the skills that had once defined him, but in service of protection rather than elimination. He was still accepting dangerous responsibilities, but as part of a team rather than as an isolated weapon. The evening debrief was brief and positive. All agencies had performed effectively, intelligence had been accurate, and the threats had been contained without incident. Marcus's contribution had been significant but not dominant, exactly the kind of role he had hoped to find. Walking through the palace grounds that night, Marcus encountered several of his former colleagues from the regular guard force. They greeted him with respect but also with the easy familiarity of people who had worked together and understood each other's roles. Thompson called Johnson, who was finishing his evening patrol. Good to see you back from wherever you disappeared to today. Everything go smoothly? Just another day at the office, eh? Marcus replied with a slight smile. How was the ceremony from your perspective? Routine diplomatic protection, Johnson answered. Though I have to say, knowing you were out there somewhere made everyone feel a bit more confident about the whole thing. As Johnson continued his patrol, Marcus realized that he had finally found the balance he had been seeking. He was no longer running from his past or trying to pretend it didn't exist. Instead, he had integrated his experience and skills into a life that served others, while allowing him to maintain his humanity and peace of mind. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. Saw the news about the summit. Hope you had a quiet day at work. The kids are excited about your visit next month. Marcus smiled as he typed his response. Very quiet day. Looking forward to seeing the kids and hearing about their adventures. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Thompson was exactly who he wanted to be. A man who could protect others when necessary, while living a life defined by more than the capacity for violence. He had found a way to honor both his deadly skills and his fundamental humanity, and in doing so, had discovered a kind of peace he had never thought possible.